A $25,000 entry tournament, 3 players left, and $825,000 for first place, and a river decision for your tournament life, with bottom pair. Sounds like an easy decision? Well, not for Patrik Antonius, legend of the game who can look back on an over 20-year-long career in which he managed to become the most successful Finnish poker player of all time.
Patrik Antonius, the winner. This is the moment that Patrik Antonius became an EPT champion.
Old school Antonius.
Of Patrik Antonius.
But while he had most of his dominant and likely most profitable phase in the 2000s and early 2010s, the question is if a so-called old school player of the game can still do it in today's game of the solver age. In this hand, chip leader Mustafov opens the button with 10-8 offsuit. The small blind folds and Patrik decides to call his Jack-2 suited in the big blind.
Here we go.
Mustafov makes a 1/3 pot c-bet on the 7-6 deuce suited flop and Patrik check calls his bottom pair. On the turn Queen of Hearts, Mustafov continues to barrel his gut shot, which also blocks both flush draws on the board. Patrik did pick up the flush draw nonetheless, and check calls once again. On the river, the ace of diamonds peels off, and after a short tank, Mustafov decides to follow through with his bluff and put Antonius all in for his tournament life. Now, despite having only a pair of deuces and to some surprise, he doesn't instantly fold his hand against the shove. Instead, he goes into a tank.
The fact that Antonius hasn't insta-mucked his hand. You know, the sickest thing, Randy, is as soon as Feridine moved all in, Antonius just kind of gave him the side-eye, just snap staring him down. I mean, look at this. The fact that he's even considering making the hero call here with bottom pair.
Can he make the call?
After tanking for this long.
Pitää olla rehellinen, että mutta mä oon ollut aina siis tosi vahvuudet siinä, että mä oon just siinä hetkessä hyvin mukana, mitä tapahtuu tällä hetkellä.
Long.
Tapahtuu tällä hetkellä. Pokeri on oikeiden päätösten tekemistä, mutta river-päätökset. Ja myös turnissä, mutta riverissä enemmän tämmöistä isojen päätöksen. Tää on ollut mun aina suurin vahvuus. Mä oon aina omasta mielestäni tehnyt tosi hyviä päätöksiä riverissä. Mä oon tehnyt hyviä kippejä, hyviä maksuja, hyviä value-pettejä.
One third of the turn and he makes the call. Randy, are you...
Gentlemen, he's done it.
So what exactly happened in this hand? Did Patrik Antonius just make a decision based on his gut? Obviously, live poker gives people the chance to use more than pure math to make a decision. Being able to see your opponent and taking note of all the little details their body might give away can potentially give you the extra information you need to make a decision. And if your read is right, the play doesn't need approval from theoretical concepts. But is it that simple? Having played hundreds of thousands and maybe even millions of live poker hands in his life on the highest level, Patrik Antonius is definitely one of the best poker players to pick up tendencies from players' body language and execute on them. So it's not unlikely that he consciously or subconsciously picked up a hint that would tend him to call one of the weakest hands he can even have in this spot. But while this is sometimes plain and simply it can also just be a lazy reasoning to explain any possible hand. Whether it would be a good call in the long run or not, if the play works this time, it's easy for everybody to scream,
"Sick read, he doesn't need GTO."
But was this call really just a feel play? Or is there even a theoretical concept behind it, which shows that Patrik can still compete with today's GTO-based crushers? Looking into it, we'll see that we can find an approach which can be applied by you and me, even if we aren't live poker mind readers like Patrik Antonius. The first thing that comes to mind when thinking about why Patrik made the call on the river is that Mustafov's value hands might not be as many as it seems at first glance. Of course, the runout of the board does look scary with the queen and the ace being overcards to the flop, but at the same time, They make it unlikely that Mustafov would value bet a hand like King 7 or Pocket 9s on the river. Also, while he would definitely value bet any ace on the river, how many of those would he have barreled on the flop and the turn? Usually, ace high is a good hand to try to bring the showdown and not risk being raised off your equity. So while his value range could actually be narrower than it looks, Mustafov can easily have a lot of bluffs. Hands like his actual combo can add up to a large amount of holdings if barreled at full frequency, especially if all offsuit combos are included. Add to them flush draws that could potentially decide to bluff through as well, and the amount of bluffs might actually surpass the amount of value combos on the river. To have this thought be more than just a guess, let's check and see what would be the actual GTO solution. We'll start by solving the preflop solution in Simple Preflop, and a bit surprisingly, we can see that both players actually decided to play hands that are not part of the solver's ICM-based preflop strategy, as both 10-8 off as well as Jack-9 suited would be a preflop fold. These ICM-based spots can be very difficult to get right as they are unique situations. The solutions depend on stack size and payouts, so we can't blame them. In order for you to get button versus big blind spots correct in your daily cash game though, you can now get your free preflop charts for this spot, which is the most common situation in No Limit Hold'em. Simply click on the link in the description and your ranges will be sent to you for free within minutes. Moving to PioSOLVER for the post-flop analysis, we'll adjust both ranges a bit to account for the wider ranges that they are apparently playing in this spot. On the flop, the button, or Mustafov, doesn't really like betting 10-8 according to the solver's solution. Being only 14 big blinds deep, the big blind, or Patrik, is incentivized to shove a lot of his pair hands against the c-bet, and having to bet fold 10-8 and not being able to realize its gut shot and overpair equity would be a big loss. Jack-deuce, however, is a clear call on the flop. On the turn, we'll see the same story regarding 10-8. Patrik should have many check raises on the turn, and 10-8 hates to fold to these when it could just check back and potentially outdraw them. And with Patrik's bottom pair plus flush draw being a clear check call again, we are arriving at the river. Here we can see the small amount of 10-8 off combos that did barrel and get to this spot actually being a shove. Not having suited connectors like 5-4 suited in his preflop range, 10 high is the worst hand he can have here, which is often a good enough reason to make it a bluffing candidate. So what about Patrik's Jack-deuce? Is it a clear fold like you'd have expected it beforehand, or may it even be a GTO call? Well, it's a fold. Clearly folding, Jack-deuce of hearts is losing Patrik about $8,000 on average if we apply the ICM structure of the situation. So after all, is Patrik just not GTO savvy and did in fact manage to get some read out of Mustafov? Or was he just plain lucky? Well, I think there's a third option which is even more likely. One that you can use as well to increase your profits at the poker table.
Me? You mean me?
See, as we just discovered, Mustafov's 10-8 off isn't really a flop bet and turn barrel most of the time. But he did so anyway. If he knows or assumes this, why should Patrik play an equilibrium strategy when his opponent is likely bluffing more than optimal? Barreling a hand that should be checked almost always, and having seen him be quite aggressive in many spots before this hand, it doesn't seem too far-fetched that Mustafov could not only bluff 10-8 off at full frequency in this spot, but also other similar hands like 10-9, Jack-8 or Jack-9 off. We can input this assumption into the solver, which is called node locking. This gives us the optimal counter strategy to an assumed strategy that Mustafov might be playing. Having him bluff off all 10-8, 10-9, Jack-8 and Jack-9, voila, Jack-deuce suited is actually becoming a call on the river. Which means that Patrik Antonius doesn't necessarily have to be a mind reader to have made this call. I don't think it's unlikely he went to a similar thought process when making this decision. In that case, he would even have the approval of the solver's results. And be proving that he definitely can keep up in today's games, which are more GTO than those games he crushed over 10 years ago.
He's done it, Randy. He's done it, and I cannot explain how important that hero call against Mustafov with 3 players left came into this final result.
Now, since bluff catching isn't the only important thing in poker, I suggest you to watch this video next to learn how to bluff like the best.